Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the latest webinar hosted by HVS, Bird & Bird, AlixPartners and EP. It's a beautiful morning, so I'm glad you've been able to join us. Today we look at the growing concerns over the challenges we face in regards to talent. I think many people believe we face a perfect storm as operators struggle to find talent. The consumer is obviously looking for higher standards as they return to operations in terms of both service and feeling valued. And also they're seeking higher standards in terms of enhanced personalized experiences as they become more accustomed to improved shopping standards and experiences through digital innovation. So there's a lot of questions being asked about the hotel sector about how it's going to respond in terms of service and in terms of what it's going to deliver in terms of experience as we come out of the pandemic. The industry has lost some exceptional talent, very sadly, during the pandemic, which we now need to either call back, rehire, or replace. So a few facts just to try and set the scene a touch. It's estimated that the sector has lost over 355,000 paid employees during the pandemic. Now that's one concern, but the bigger concern is 75% of that 355,000 are under the age of 35. So where we've lost them is that kind of emerging talent, which is how do we solve that problem? UK Hospitality have spoken of a likely forecast of 188,000 vacancies at any one time in the sector over the next year. So that's going to be a challenge. And we face what people are calling the great rehire. And it's expected that operators are going to have to somehow manage through on 20% less than full capacity in terms of staffing. To add to the issues, base salaries are expected for low-level staff to increase between 20 and 27%. How's that going to impact on models and obviously on inflation? Brexit has obviously added to the issue and the perfect storm. And there are many asking government to support the allowing of international talent to work in the UK. Altogether, this is asking a whole range of challenges to operators, but it's also asking a whole range of deep questions that we need to answer as well. Have operations companies done enough over the past 18 months to prepare for this moment? Many are questioning whether that has been good enough. I'm sure the panel will answer that a bit later. Has the education system been good enough to support the industry over the last 10 to 20 years? Is it now being found out and is it in need of change? Same question for industry. Has the industry been good enough at developing talent rather than relying on European staff? It's well known that a lot of budgets in relative terms have halved over the last 20 years. Is it now time to reinvest in the L&D as we go forward? Now, there's no question there's going to be a need now for a major rethink and a change in behaviours and models. And that's again why this webinar today is of such importance. So I'm really looking forward to what's going to be said. As the industry rebuilds, the media and the experts will be watching how companies do react to these changes and adapt to the challenges we face. It is going to be a very sensitive time, which will attract a lot of interest, a lot of comments, and no doubt, no little criticism at times. Leadership too is changing very radically. It's probably changed more in the last 5 years than it did in the 30 years pre that. It is now about bringing people together, unifying people, creating common agendas that people can buy into, about diversity and inclusion in a far stronger way, about stronger values returning to business that actually really focus on sustainability, both social sustainability, how we interact with communities, and how we grow sustainable business for the future. There are lots of questions being asked of business that they haven't needed to answer for a long time. So it is going to be a fascinating period. This will lead to new styles of leadership emerge, which will support the changes that need to come along. It's going to be challenging, but it could also be the start of a very exciting period of time. Let's see what our speakers say today. Lauren, can I now just bring you on to ask some polling questions to start setting the scene?
Hey, thanks, Chris. Absolutely. With so many questions to ask and to answer, it's always really helpful for us to hear your views. And we've put together 5 polling questions, which I'd really love you to answer with me. I'll be going through all of these and you'll be able to see them on your screen. And if you can answer them as we go, I'll be able to share all the results at the end. So it'd be great to know, which part of the hotel sector do you work in? Are you joining us from HR or talent management, operations or management, administration? And are you an investor or an owner, part of the finance or legal, advisory, or are you one another, perhaps academic? Second question is, it's forecast, as Chris mentioned, that most operations will have to run at 20% less staff than pre-pandemic numbers. What is your forecast? Are you currently running at a full complement? Are you possibly at 10% less, 20% less, 30% less? Are you at 40 or hopefully not 50% or more? Now, third question. If your organization has made use of the government's furlough scheme, what percentage of furloughed employees are you welcoming back after the 30th of September? Are you fortunate to be welcoming most, if not all of them, say 85% or above? Between 50 and 85%? Between 20 and 50? Or is that unfortunately fewer than 20%? Or are you a company that did not make use of the furlough scheme? Fourth question, many argue that the current talent crisis is, as Chris mentioned, a perfect storm because of Brexit, COVID-19, and the fact that talent has not been invested in potentially enough historically. Do you agree that that's the case? Is that a yes, a no, or do you say yes, but you are actively investing more in talent to change this for the future? And the final question before I share the results is that many believe that the shortage of talent will lead to a tech revolution in the hospitality industry. Do you agree with this? Thank you so much for submitting that. Let me share them with you. Interestingly, we have a lot from legal, some from operations, advisory, consultants. Gosh, forecast. Yeah, that is good to see that some of you are running at full complement, but the majority seem to be at 20%. And I'm sorry to see some at 30%. Fortunately, gosh, not too many at 50% or more less capacity. Great to see that majority of you are bringing back 85% or more of your staff after furlough. That's really encouraging, or at least between 50 and 85%. And you do agree quite heavily that talent has not been invested in sufficiently historically, and that it is something that does need to be addressed. And again, overwhelmingly agree that technology is something that is being revolutionized and used in our industry because of the shortage of talent. Thanks so much for sharing that with us. We really do appreciate it.
Thanks, Lauren. That's superb. Now, as we go through this, if you have questions, please do feel free to ask for the buttons at the bottom. We will endeavour to get back to everyone to answer the questions and also ask the questions as we go through. If we don't, we'll come back to you afterwards. So rest assured, we will certainly do all we can to answer every question. So thank you for that. Let me now introduce you to Stephanie Creed, who is a senior associate with the international HR team of Bird & Bird. Hello, Stephanie. Welcome.
Hey, Chris.
And Stephanie has a great love for hotels. Her specialism also is in data protection and crossover matters, which has obviously been a fascinating subject over the last few years. And I think she's got some really interesting insights to share with us. So good luck, Stephanie, and I look forward to listening to what you've got to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. I'm just going to attempt to make technology work and bring up the slides. One moment. So you should all now be able to see the slides on your screen. So we're looking today at the sort of the people agenda, what's going on in the...
Sorry here. Just we can see your notes as well as the slides. So if you want to just try that again.
Okay, I will try that again. Right, can you see anything now?
I can see that. Perfect. No, that one still goes
That one's
back. Yeah.
Mhm. I will, in that case, remove, and I will attempt to do this from other notes, so bear with me, but not a problem. So looking at the agenda and what we've got on, it's pretty clear that HR and legal teams have had a fairly full to-do list over the last 18 months. And unfortunately, there's no real let-up on the horizon yet, as Chris and Lauren have both alluded to. There is still a lot of change happening. Principally, we're going to be talking about COVID, but obviously Brexit and the other sort of talent training and recruitment issues that have been alluded to play a part in all of this. So what I'm going to do is walk through some of the key issues that you're likely to be seeing on your people-related agendas over the next 6 months. There is plenty more to talk about, but we'll try and focus on some of the key ones this morning. So on our agenda, we've got getting the right people for your business, and we'll look specifically at immigration, looking at changes to the way we work and some of the challenges that are coming through, a quick look at staff data and how this all plays in and what you need to bear in mind, and then the thorny issue of restructuring, reorganising, right-sizing, making sure your business is the sort of people are fitting what your business needs and wants to do. So we're looking at immigration specifically here and getting the right people for your business. Now, when developing the new points-based immigration system, which came into force on the 1st of January 2021, the government focused on the new skilled worker category, or skilled migrants, at the expense of certain other groups. And this has a particular implication for the hotels and wider hospitality sector. Under the old system, and prior to Brexit, it used to be relatively simple and cost effective, more importantly, to employ non-UK nationals in hotels. The new skilled worker regime is not only costly, but it is unlikely to be open to the majority of roles in the hotel sector, particularly those who are going to be employed in traditionally lower skilled jobs. Skilled workers also have to meet certain minimum salary threshold requirements, which are likely to prove difficult in the sector. Currently, the wages threshold can be reduced to around just over £20,000 a year for migrants who have specific characteristics, such as a PhD relevant to the role they're hired into. But you can see the problem with that particular adaptation of the system. Most lower skilled and lower paid jobs in the hotel sector don't generally require such qualifications. So this really isn't a system that's set up with this particular sector in mind. Now, fortunately, there are some skills schemes that are still available. The Youth Mobility Scheme, which is a 2-year visa for individuals aged between 18 and 30 from certain countries. You're looking at Canada, New Zealand, Australia, that sort of list of countries. That is still open. The EU Settlement Scheme, which you'll probably all be familiar with, those already in the UK with either settled or pre-settled status can still stay. And noting that the deadline for application under that scheme was the 30th of June 2021. And the final one that's possibly relevant is going to be the new graduate scheme. Now, that opened on the 1st of July 2021 and allows recent graduates to remain in the UK for a 2-year period, 3-year for doctoral students, after graduation to continue to contribute to society and the UK economy post-study. So there are opportunities there, but they are limited. Now, you can see there we've got listed a couple of possible future developments. We think there is going to be some active lobbying. We certainly hope there's going to be some active lobbying to encourage the government to change and adapt this system and better flex with better support for the hotels and wider hospitality sector in mind on the immigration front. Based on its publicity and its policy statements, we think it's unlikely that the government is going to make any such changes in the short term, because everything it is saying indicates that it appears intent on only allowing high-skilled workers into the UK. But as reality bites and we see some of what is happening across the sector coming through, there is a good chance that we may see some further changes, and things like extension to youth mobility scheme for other countries, looking at a low-skilled visa route, and particularly with targeting certain key periods where hotels and the hospitality sector is very busy. That sort of thing might well be on the cards. So, looking at coming on to reopening and the sort of practical issues. The pandemic has changed the way we work. There's no way getting around that. And some of that presents a particular challenge to this sector. There is plenty to say here, and you'll have probably heard some of this before, but it's worth just having a look at again. I'm going to focus on a couple of key aspects. Hotels are in a unique position. The majority of your staff cannot do their jobs from home. So health and safety in practice in the workplace is going to be a particular concern to manage. Health and safety concerns are a developing area of tension between employer and employee. That's not new. And you should be expecting to manage health and safety concerns and resistance regarding return to work to the physical workplace. That's a given at the moment. It's important to be visible in implementing health and safety measures. That is to reassure those who are returning, to encourage their return, to manage refusals, much easier to do that where you've got visible signs of how you're keeping people safe, and to protect yourself in terms of claims. Now we'll talk about claims in a minute. Measures include the usual suspects: cleaning, washing, social distancing. It is very much still possible to require staff and guests to wear masks beyond the 19th of July. And based on what we're seeing, that's the approach most employers are taking at this point, particularly during the period of transition. One of the key things is that it is really, really worth planning ahead to manage absence, and as part of that, updating your health and safety policies and your sickness absence reporting and management procedures and policies. Aside from the obvious of managing staff back in and dealing with refusals, hotels are particularly vulnerable to the impacts of self-isolation and pinging. You'll have all seen it in the press in recent weeks. Staff commuting to and attending the workplace increases the number of potential contacts. All of that is going to be a particular challenge in opening up, and particularly in that sort of tricky initial period of opening up. The final sort of piece to think about is where you're replacing human contact with technical solutions. You will need to consider the data and privacy implications of this, and as well as any inherent risks knock on to the duty of mutual trust and confidence. And that's particularly in the case of anything around employee monitoring, logging in, checking access. All of those things are higher risk activities. So there is a bigger piece to sort of bear in mind as part of that. One of the key areas where we're seeing tension in practice is between staff on the reintegration and the challenges around reintegration in practice. You'll have all seen articles around post-lockdown anxiety, FOGO or FOTO, depending on which acronym you use, and tensions can flare up where staff have been treated differently. For example, some have been furloughed and others have been taking on additional duties and worked through. And as the world opens up again, we are seeing those tensions flaring up, and particularly tensions where staff respond differently to returning to work for various reasons. That may play into what their views on vaccination are, what their views on testing is, all sorts of things. You will need to take care to ensure that any periods of transition and those tensions are managed carefully to avoid the risk of claims, because it's easy to see those tensions escalating into potential high risk and high profile claims. There are key questions around vaccination and testing. Things like, can you require staff to be tested or vaccinated? Can you exclude staff where they refuse to be tested or vaccinated? We've put together a guide, and there's a link in the slides coming further on. But as a general rule, you can, in most cases, require staff to be tested where reasonable to do so. You need to comply with data protection requirements. You can't physically force staff to be tested. Might sound unusual, but we have been asked that question. But in most cases, you should be able to take disciplinary action where an individual refuses to be tested. You will need to consider, obviously, refusals on a case-by-case basis. The position with vaccination is quite different. Enforcing vaccination isn't possible. The government can't do it, so employers certainly can't do it. There are circumstances where vaccinations could be mandatory, could be a condition of continuing employment, but that really is unlikely to apply in the hotel sector. So any dismissal or disciplinary action in connection with a vaccine status is likely to be very high risk. Again, you can order people to come back to work, but it does increase the risk of resistance, complaints, potential negative publicity, and so on. So the safer approach is very much to use persuasion and encouragement, and then almost deal with the refusals in an individual way and isolate them. And you can really dig down to what is that person individually thinking and how do you deal with them. As flagged, we are starting to see health and safety and COVID-related claims coming through the employment tribunals. Those are very much up and running, so you do need to be aware of that. There are 4 main types that we're seeing. The first one you'll be familiar with, discrimination claims. There is the right under sections 44 and 100 of the Employment Rights Act. Employees have the right not to suffer a detrimental dismissal, including constructive dismissal, for leaving work or refusing to return to work where they have a reasonable belief that they are in a serious and imminent danger which they cannot avert. And there is a similar right in relation to taking appropriate steps to protect themselves or others from danger. You can really see how that plays into the COVID position that we're all in. There is also the risk of negligence claims. Employers can be liable for breach of their duty of care towards employees and vicariously liable for actions of its employees if they cause harm to others in the workplace. And that's either physical harm, transmitting the virus, or mental distress. The final one flagged there is whistleblowing claims, and that's the one where you can see people easily being tripped up, even if you manage to protect from all the actual potential direct implications of COVID. If there is a complaint, that's another risk to be concerned with. And all of these carry a higher compensation awards under employment law. Very quickly looking at the role of data, to manage reopening and returning to work, you will inevitably need to collect and manage more staff personal data and potentially health data. The obvious ones being things like COVID testing and vaccination data. All of that carries its own risk, and it is really worth taking care over it. The key questions that we're seeing coming through is things like, can I test staff or look at test results? Can I ask staff whether they've been vaccinated? Can I ask for proof, vaccination, testing or immunity? Can I retain those records? And as reaffirmed in the ICO's guidance, data protection law doesn't prevent you as an employer from taking the necessary steps to keep staff and to keep the general public safe. So you can ask about testing or vaccine status if there is a good reason to do so. In practice, the guidance is that you shouldn't seek the information unless it's necessary and proportionate to do so. So you will need to look at the reason you're asking for the data, looking at what data you're asking for and how those two correlate. As an example, if an employee in question is not working from your premises or is unlikely to come into contact with anyone, with other staff members, guests, suppliers, when carrying out their duties, you're going to find it harder to justify asking for vaccination data. Where the reverse is true, if they are going to come in contact regularly, it's much easier to justify collection and management of that data. You can retain testing and vaccination records subject to compliance with data protection, but in all cases, you should only collect and then retain the minimum amount of data. And you should consider that retention period at the outset, review regularly what data you've got, and then erase or anonymize it when you no longer need it. One quick flag, you really should be prepared to receive and manage data erasure requests in respect of testing and vaccine data. We've seen a rise on that, partly as a result of employees becoming more aware of what personal data may be held. So do make sure that you've got appropriate processes in place for that. And as the final sort of key topic, most of you will be already well through the process of assessing what your new working world looks like post-COVID, post-Brexit, and taking steps to adapt accordingly. Now, often this is going to involve restructuring or realigning the business, doesn't necessarily involve redundancies. As you'll have all seen, the developments are newsworthy. They come up in the press, so factor that in as part of your plans. If you want to minimise your risks in relation to managing and right-sizing your business, consider the needs of your business both now and moving forward, and also consider the staff that you have. If possible, and this is only where possible, factor in your longer-term needs and think about reducing cuts, reusing staff elsewhere in the business, and recycling, so retraining or upskilling staff where possible, because all of that is going to bring down your risk in terms of claims, negative publicity, but also may give you better longer-term staff retention, which is one of the challenges that Chris mentioned earlier. When you say restructure, most employees will inevitably hear redundancies. So managing staff reaction to any developments is going to be key, particularly where you're anticipating redundancies. Early engagement and communication with staff is going to help both manage the process and those affected, and to reduce the risks associated with the process. And you never know, your employees may have new ideas and things that can help you that you hadn't thought of, so they can be a useful source. From a strictly legal perspective, make sure that you follow applicable processes to minimise the risk to your business. They do take time, potentially, but there is a real cost payoff, particularly when you're dealing with at large scale. Think about the practical steps that you're going to need, as much as the legal. How many people are you going to need to hold meetings? Who's going to hold them? Where are you going to hold them in the COVID environment? Particularly, again, for large scale redundancies and restructures, and where collective consultation is needed. And I think on that note, you can see there we've got practical issues referenced around media interest remains strong. We're seeing an awful lot of employee activism fueled by social media. It is worth factoring this into what you're going to be doing. And that final point around reputation, we've talked about retention of staff and sort of restructuring, but actually recruitment and retention, as Chris has alluded to, is going to be key to that reputation and helping you in keeping and attracting staff that you want. On that note, Russell, shall I hand over to you for the panel session?
Well, just a quick question, but we've got a second. Stephanie, firstly, well done. Continue to do that without slides, so well done. You came across superbly. There's a question which is a fair one. If an employee can prove they got COVID at work, is the company responsible?
It depends on what the risk is and where it actually came from, but there is a potential liability there, and that's what I think a lot of employers are going to be really concerned about. Where the employer has done everything they can to limit that risk, to a certain extent that's going to give them a limited amount of protection. If they've done everything they could and it still happened, you can see where it's going to be hard to pin them blame on the employer, and that will happen because at the moment we don't know enough about the transmission of the virus. It's mutating, it's developing, and we are told routinely, actually it's not airborne, it's touch, actually it's not touch, it's this. So as long as the employer has been following the guidance as best they can at the relevant time and taken all reasonable steps, that is going to minimise the risk, but it won't ultimately necessarily get rid of that risk entirely. I think that's the best guidance we can give at the moment.
It's going to be incredibly problematic, isn't it? It's interesting, just to give it a bit unfair, I was interesting about what's blowing up today about the nightclubs and the fact that comes in September, that everyone's going to have their passport to be able to get into a nightclub, which the nightclubs are saying is actually deeply unfair because it gives them a disadvantage against restaurants and bars. Isn't that an argument really going to raise its head quite dramatically over the next month or so?
I think it is, and I think we may see, it feels like the government is using nightclubs as sort of the advance guard to test the response and the resistance to having COVID and vaccination passports. So we may see either a rollback from, if the pressure works, or we may see it actually it being pushed out and the government saying, actually, it's not just nightclubs, we need to be looking at other venues and environments. So it's going to be really interesting to see that play out at the moment. And we've got no clear indication as to which way, because the government have gone back and forward on vaccine passports. And I think we'll also see international attitudes towards it playing in as well, as part of how that will work.
That's going to be fascinating. Stephanie, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you.
No problem at all. Thank you.
Russell, can I bring you in, please?
Wonderful. thanks again, Stephanie, and thanks, Chris, for taking us through the first half hour of the show today, and really appreciate the fact that you managed under the more difficult circumstances, Stephanie. So very much appreciate it. We're the overarching topic today is whether Britain's got talent, and specifically the talent we need to enable the hotel sector to return to profitability. But let's broaden this to include Europe as well as Britain, because I see from our esteemed audience today that there are some people who reflect the business beyond the shores of the UK. But with me are 6 distinguished experts, each with a specialist focus on the subject and each with different opinions to share with us. So please join me as I encourage them to put their microphones on and put their cameras on. Sally Beck from Lancaster London Hotel, the Felicity Black-Roberts, Hyatt, Sarah Brocklebank of Atlas Hotels, Jane O'Riordan from AlixPartners, Andrew Robb from RBH, and Donald Sloan of Oxford Cultural Collective. And Jane, you're the only one who hasn't yet joined us on camera. If you could work on that, that would be great. Don't quite know why that should be. 10 out of 10 for Felicity for joining us not only on camera, but also from her holiday home in Spain, where she discovered yesterday when she arrived that her internet connection had been cancelled, probably, as she said, because they hadn't paid the bill for 15 months. But anyway, welcome all. In addition, Steph is going to stay in the background just in case it would be useful for her to answer a specific question. Now, I've prepared a number of questions, but I do want to encourage members of our audience to put your questions to our panelists using the Q&A function. Some of you have already discovered that, so please use that function, and we're going to try and get through as many as possible. But if we cannot deal with all the questions, we will deal with them in writing afterwards when we send you the recording of the webinar. So all I would encourage you is please don't be anonymous. We're very suspicious of people who describe themselves as anonymous, so please retain your full name, even if it is M. Mouse. Now, let's kick off with a simple question. Panelists, please tell us in less than a minute who you work for, what you do, and why this topic is of such significant interest to you. Now, this is the only time when we're going to encourage you to make a brief advertisement. So let's go in alpha order. Sally, please kick us off.
Hello, everyone. I'm Sally Beck, General Manager of the Royal Lancaster, London, also founder of the Hoteliers Charter. And talent is vitally important. For our hotel, I'm running a retention drive. We were light with our redundancies through the COVID pandemic, and for me it's about retention, recruitment where we need, but the culture in what you run is, to my mind, the most vital part. I run an inverted hierarchy. My team are part of the solution, and my goal is to run the happiest hotel in London. And I think if the team are empowered and engaged, they will stay. And they make a massive difference to your business. We're a massive hotel, 400 bedrooms, central London, we're number 8 on TripAdvisor. That is not because of the hotel, it's because of the talent and the happiness I have in my team.
Thank you, Sally. You spoke for a minute without hesitation, repetition, or deviation. Felicity.
Good morning, everybody. Felicity Black-Roberts from Hyatt. I am part of the team who develops our brands across Western Europe. And I think although my job on a day-to-day basis doesn't involve hiring or dealing directly with HR issues, the reality is none of us in the industry can afford to be an island. If we have hotels that aren't profitable, then other parts of the industry and the investment market doesn't work. So, yeah, I'm here because we're not an island.
Okay, wonderful. Sarah, you're next up.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Sarah Brocklebank. I'm HR Director at Atlas Hotels, which is a hotel management company. We operate 50 limited service hotels across the UK, and we're owned by a company called London and Regional, which has a hotels arm that looks after 17,000 rooms globally. Why is this important to me? I mean, I think like Sally has really focused on there, the profitability element for me starts with the employees. So if you've got the right talent in place, you'll be servicing the guests well, which ultimately will lead to the profitability of your organisation. So at this point, coming out of COVID, there probably isn't anything more important than trying to answer this question.
Wonderful. Thanks, Sarah, and thanks for stepping in for Desmond, who was unable to make it. I wouldn't say quite at the last minute, but almost at the last minute. So well stepped in. Jane O'Riordan.
Yes, good morning, everyone. I'm a senior advisor for hospitality at AlixPartners. In addition to that, I also chair 3 restaurant groups in the UK: Turtle Bay, Caravan Coffee Roasters, and Flight Club Darts. And prior to chairing those 3 businesses, I spent 23 years as part of the senior team building Nando's, which is probably one of the UK's largest people-focused businesses. Everyone knows that people make the chicken. So for us, people are actually the heart of everything we do. And that is the same with all my hospitality businesses.
Wonderful. So by pure coincidence, that's the 4 ladies out the way. Andrew, your contribution to this 1-minute wonder.
Thanks, Russell. I'm Andrew Robb, CFO for RBH Hospitality Management. We're a third-party management company. We've got 50 hotels across the UK, ranging from full-service hotels to limited-service hotels and multi-brand. The key focus for us as a business who doesn't own assets, all our assets are people, and we've had that focus for a long time. So vitally important that we are looking after them, embedding the culture, and working with key partners and things like the Hoteliers Charter that Sally mentioned, and focusing on looking after the people.
Wonderful. And last but not least, Donald.
Well, thank you, Russell, and hello, everyone. Yes, I'm Donald Sloan of the Oxford Cultural Collective. I built my majority of my career in leadership in higher education. So I've been responsible for the development of young people who are seeking to build their management and leadership careers in the hospitality sector internationally. I left the formal higher education sector a few years ago to set up the Oxford Cultural Collective. I'm still working in education with a variety of institutions around the world. And my interest really in this topic is because I am always looking for creative ways of developing talent and providing opportunity for people to build challenging and rewarding careers in hospitality.
Donald, you've frozen on me, and I'm sorry if I'm interrupting, and I hope you can hear me nevertheless. So,
yes,
a very diverse panel, great levels of experience, and I'm really hoping that they will answer both my questions and your questions. So don't forget the Q&A button is the place to put your questions. So, ladies and gentlemen, first off, what is the one key lesson which you have learned in the past 18 months concerning the talent that we have in the hotel industry? Now, I'm asking for one, okay? And I'm asking for you to take a different one if the person before you or the people before you have already chosen the one that you were going to say. So the one key lesson that you've learned in the past 18 months, so let's hope that there are 6 different lessons. And let's start this time with Felicity. What's the one key lesson you've learned?
I think the one, for me, kind of sitting outside of operations in the more real estate side of the business, I think the one key thing that I've learned is the absolute importance of people to our business. And it's very easy for those of us who aren't necessarily involved in day-to-day operations to lose sight of that. And then when you start to dig back into it and you see what's going on at a hotel level, you actually appreciate what our colleagues do on the ground. And it's interesting, because when I was listening to the presentation earlier, we talk about skilled workers and low skilled workers, and we classify people in the hospitality industry more towards the end of low skill. I don't think dealing with people and pleasing people and creating great experiences for people should be classified as low skill. That's a skill, that's a higher qualifications or education, but people in our industry are skilled. They're just skilled in a different way. And I think that's something that we've got complacent about and we need to change.
Okay. Sarah, what's the one key thing that you've learned?
Well, luckily, Felicity didn't take what I was going to say. So I was thinking, what am I going to say? Felicity does. But my focus... was going to be on resilience. I have been overwhelmed by the level of, these are individuals who applied for a job working in a hotel to deal with key workers needing to be they had more recently the quarantine hotels, which has really challenged our business as well. So those individuals have time in the UK and certainly in the world were isolating at home and working from home. Beyond that, in terms of resilience, we saw 10% of our workforce actually volunteer to come into work so that people who didn't want to or couldn't wouldn't have to. So we had a campaign called Atlas Heroes, and we had 10% of our workforce volunteer for that to come in and work during the early days of the pandemic when we were worried we weren't going to have enough staff to kind of cover the hotels that we had open. So I think the resilience of our people has been amazing throughout.
Great. The one thing I've learned is that technology will thwart us as we go through these things, and I cannot wait for us to be doing these things in person. And all I can say is that my colleagues at EP and Alex and Bird and Bird have made it our desire that the next one of these that we run will be an in-person event. It might be a hybrid event, but we're actually discussing that this afternoon. So look forward to the technology being less of an issue. But that gives Jane a bit of thinking time. What's the one key lesson that you've learned?
Well, I've learned that actually looking after your talent pays back. So what I have seen, particularly in businesses across the sector who have proactively looked after their team's physical well-being, mental well-being and financial health, has really paid back in reams, actually. And I've been so impressed to see what I think under incredible duress, some of the really skilled members of our team step up. I mean, we have seen some people perform incredibly well in very difficult circumstances. And a lot of that has been from this proactive drive to look after people. Always paid back. And
I'm assuming you've finished because you've frozen on me, but Andrew, your one key thing?
For me, I think the key has been the importance of communication. For us, with dealing with people remotely in a different way that we normally worked, as well as the sort of transparency during the changes that we're implementing. And unfortunately, that was some job losses across the business, but that openness and communication with people during that process so that we understood it, so that we could get to a solution that minimized the number of job losses across the business and had a sort of really open view with the people. I think we've really had positive feedback about the communication style and the importance of being sort of open and honest with the team. And I think that's something we've always had, but just really sort of rammed home the importance of it in the last 12 months.
Great. Donald, from your perspective, the one key lesson.
Sure. Well, I mean, one of the key observations, I suppose, is that the pandemic, the COVID crisis has amplified and accelerated challenges that the sector was facing anyway. Chris alluded to the perfect storm that the sector has been facing. And I think that what it has done is accelerate, in particular, problems around staffing. And this is something everyone can relate to. What I've been most impressed by, and what I've, I guess, learned most from, is observing which companies it is that have been able to maintain connection with their employees throughout this difficult period, maintain positive relationships with their employees, adopt creative means of continuing to nurture their talent and their loyalty. It's maybe building on what Jane was saying, but I think my observation really is that more creative techniques are going to be required for embedding positive cultures in hospitality. And, you know, the more competitive the labour market becomes, the more the onus is upon leaders in hospitality to think creatively about what can be their point of distinction when it comes to culture. Why is it that talented prospective employees should choose them over another company? And I think we've learned a lot by observing what progressive employers have done in this respect, in the way in which Sally was outlining in the start of this section.
Okay, Sally, you've had 5 people steal all the ideas that you were going to come up with. Have you got a 6th?
I do. Flexibility. I wrote to my team right at the early days when we had to shut down the hotel, and I needed people with an SIA license to help me run security. 2 people stepped forward that had licenses. 4 people didn't have licenses, took it upon themselves to get licenses, and they created my security team, so I didn't have to use agency. The head of security then moved on, got headhunted by another position, and my events operations manager stepped into that role for six months. The flexibility exhibited by my team has been tremendous, and it's helped us. And I think we underestimate resilience, which Sarah said. The resilience of our team, the communication that's needed, as Donald said, but the flexibility to help the business if they're involved. Oh my God, flexibility, creativity, it's amazing. So never underestimate your workforce.
Okay. Listen, I'm sorry that we had to do it that way and that I insisted on unique answers from everybody. And so that will continue for the next question. So what do you think the main issue that the UK and or European hotel sector is currently experiencing that needs to be resolved as quickly as possible? So I'd like you to choose one only. Again, I'm going to move down the line, but I'm going to give Sally the opportunity to be a little bit higher up the batting order on this one, as she was last during the previous question. So the main issue that the UK and or European hotel sector is currently experiencing that we really need to get to grips with as soon as possible. So Sarah, what's the answer?
Well, clearly the macro issues are attraction and retention, but I do and feel very passionately about actually the work-life balance element of hospitality.
Hang on. I'm not going to allow this. That's 3. You've just ruined the answers.
No. I'm giving you the big context. That's the big issue. The issue that I would like to talk about is work-life balance, which I do think impacts positively and negatively both attraction and retention, which I guess all of us on the call would believe that are important from a talent perspective. Now, I know from my own employees that work-life balance doesn't come in a form of working from home, you know, and unfortunately our individuals working within hotels will be seeing a lot of other people be able to work from home and they don't have the benefit of that. But I do think a way that we can really positively impact that is to do simple things like give people their rotas in advance of actually needing them to work. So, you know, we all have those horror stories of people have their rotas or their shifts one day before they need to come in, you know, even a week before. And actually, I think what we really need to do is focus on enabling our employees to plan their lives around work. So give them a 4-week rota, you know, enable them to be able to do much like their friends, their family members will be able to do, have time away from work, which they can plan in advance. Because I do believe if we solve that throughout the industry, and I do think it needs to be industry wide in order to drive a cultural change, that actually more people would be attracted to come and work in hospitality because they wouldn't have the perception that it has at the moment of unsociable hours, long working days. And similarly, I think we would keep more people actually in the industry. So I think it would also help with retention. So that's a big deal for me, solving that work-life balance issue.
Okay, now what happens if they get pinged? It's all very well giving them 4 weeks notice of when they're going to be required, but what happens if your plans get thwarted? Are you building in the flexibility to enable things to get buggered up, to use a technical term?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this was a journey that we started on in 2019, to be honest. And of course, COVID has really thwarted some of those issues, and we'll talk about the pinging later on. But the way that we've managed that, because we've been open through a lot of the pandemic for specific key workers, we've had those situations all the way through. And what we now have is a team of kind of roving individuals across the UK that will work in specific regions, and they will be parachuted in, if you like, to be able to come and manage within a hotel and work in a hotel that unfortunately has seen a significant number of its staff pinged and therefore self-isolating. So, you know, we're not where we wanted to be in terms of being able to provide those rotas as far out as possible, but it remains a goal for us, and we have found a solution to the pinging issue so far.
Okay, I'm going to move to Jane to see if she's got a different answer. Hopefully she will, but maybe in your answer, Jane, you can give a sort of tub-thumping answer that says the hospitality industry staff should be considered just like any other key worker.
Well, I mean, I think that they should be, for sure. But I was going to say my one sort of big thing, I think the big issue that we're facing is it has to do with the labour fluidity. I mean, we are despite the fact that we need to improve our retention, as an industry, we employ transient workers and we have a need for transient working. And therefore, without labour fluidity, we're always going to be potentially chasing sales. So we really need to try and address the cross-border movement of team, because if we can increase that and have these sort of top up of workers, we lose typically 10%. I don't know about everybody else, but I lost at least 10% when we reopened through natural attrition. And then you've just got to have some top up of that. If we don't have any immigration, then I think that's going to really affect the whole sector. So I think coming back to the initial point that we heard about at the start of the sector is, what are we going to do to try and improve that fluidity?
Okay, that actually leads quite interestingly into a question from one of our audience, who is asking, how willing are employers or hotels in the UK to support future employees to obtain a visa? And do you think that the UK visa options will be changed or will be eased for the hotel industry in the near future? As you're answering the question, Andrew, why don't you address that question as well?
Okay, I mean, for us, the biggest issue that, in terms of live issues that we're facing at the moment, has to be the self-isolation and the pinging, and I know we'll come on to discuss that, but I think in terms of the question focusing on an immediate issue, that is the immediate issue that we are facing across our portfolio. At the moment, we've had some hotels that have had half the team in a self-isolation, and it's on occasions led to either having to sell reduced capacity or close down certain areas of the hotel at reasonably short notice. And it's that unpredictability and ability to manage the team and the pressure that that's putting on the remaining working employees, I think, is often something that goes missed. And actually, there's a number of people having to work harder than ever to sort of support the business whilst they're at low staff levels or had issues with self-isolation. So that's the live issue. I think in terms of the visa support, I mean, we've had people across the business on visas, and we would continue to sort of support that. I think the challenge becomes the government and legal side as to what qualifies for a visa, rather than would we support it. So absolutely we would, but is it going to be something that is successful in a visa application? And to the earlier point around the classification of skilled or low skilled, do we actually qualify in a lot of the roles for a visa? So I think often in those situations it's going to be out with our hands, unfortunately.
Andrew, you've frozen on me, but Donald, I'm going to bring you in if you can. Answer the question and maybe pick up on the visa issue if you've got a view.
Yes, I do have a view. And just picking up particularly on what you were saying, Jane, I know you weren't quite suggesting this, but the idea that companies should be hoping for a swift change to visa regulations, that they are hoping that the government will address the labour mobility issue, I think is potentially, you would be waiting a very, very long time. In the meantime, I think there needs to be more of this focus on the cultural change that Sarah was talking about. And it's interesting thinking back to my time working with young people. They have a very sophisticated understanding of the different cultures of different organizations. And in a sense, when competition is so tight for labour, they're in a strong position to be able to pick organizations that they feel are going to provide them with opportunities for development, but also that are interested in, or rather that are socially progressive organizations that are interested in issues of diversity and inclusion, that actually can show demonstrably that they care about the impact of their business on the environment and so on. So bearing in mind that you are competing with others for great talent, I think, yes, we have to push for and lobby for changes to visa regulations, which are undoubtedly damaging. But in the meantime, there has to be more of a relentless focus on the transformation of cultures in order to attract the best talent.
Thank you. Sally, over to you. I hope we haven't stolen all your ideas again.
No, not at all. I think the most pressing thing for the UK hotel industry is the reputation of the industry. And I think that the hotels have to raise themselves up as best in class within hospitality, to encourage people to come into our industry for not just jobs, it's careers. And too often we're seen as transient. Parents don't support us for young children that want to come, or young adults that want to come into our business. And we're seen as something that's a second-rate industry. It's not true. And until we can change that, we will always struggle with this perception. I'm a working mum, I had 2 kids. You don't have to do 12, 15-hour days. Those are long gone in the hotel industry. They may still be there in hospitality, but they're not there in the hotel industry. And we have to change that perception. So,
I'm going to move on to careers in a short while, but just to give Felicity an opportunity to come in on this question. But before doing so, Sally, did you have anything to add on the visa issue, given that you probably have quite a number of your team who require them?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think the government needs to make it easier. We need to recruit. I think before we got into Brexit, UK hospitality was saying we need 750,000 people just to stand still in our industry. We need immigration, and we need to find an easy way to allow our Europeans and any other nation that wants to work with us to come in. So yeah, I would support it, but the government needs to get behind it and to start thinking sensibly and get the right people around the table. A hospitality minister would help. They need to have joined up writing to get this working out, and they need to work on that minimum salary level. It's still too high to be effective for us. So there's a lot still to be done before we can actually bring in visas into our industry at the right level where we actually need them. Okay.
Felicity, your chance just to wrap up this particular question. The one single main issue that the UK and hotel and European hotel sector really needs to get to grips with ASAP?
I think it's something, and listening to everybody there's kind of a piece of all of the answers, it's basically certainty of environment and some stability. And whether that comes through having a minister who's particularly promoting hospitality for the UK, as they do in other European countries, or clear guidelines. But right now, from what I can see, it is very unclear as an industry, how many people we're going to need in the short term, what our demand levels are. People don't know whether they can travel, can't travel, how easy it is, how difficult it is. And I think there needs to be real leadership at a high level to give people real confidence in the hospitality and particularly the hotel industry.
Okay. We've started to veer into careers, and I'd like to touch on that as to what we can do, perhaps what the government can do to boost careers in the hospitality sector. I'm keen, because I've been saying for years, and I don't know whether anybody agrees with me, but not only should we start promoting hospitality in secondary schools, I firmly believe we should start in primary schools, because if they don't get it from the get-go, then I don't think they're going to get it by the time they're at secondary school. But so how early should this start? You know, what can be done to improve the PR of the sector to make it more attractive? You know, is it down to apprentice schemes? What should the educational establishments do to address this need? We talked about low skills and low expectations. You know, we're not talking about low skills here, we're talking about high skills. But why is it that everybody seems to focus on the low skills? I apologize for the soliloquy in the question, but ladies and gentlemen, what can we do, perhaps what government can do, to boost careers in the hospitality sector? And let's start this time with Jane. What can be done?
Yeah, I think it's really important to recognise how poor the reputation is of the hospitality sector. It is seen by many young people as the job of last resort, something that you do because you're in between going on to another career or in between your terms at university, not something that actually is seen as a career. And that sort of mindset change is something we have to work on. I'd like to say, yes, I think the government should do it, but I think we all need to do it, not just the government. Yes, it'd be useful for the government to try and address our reputation with educational establishments. But I think we also should be maybe a bit better as an industry at being prouder and more vocal about the training and development we do. So if you were to look at actually what we are taking, only the Army, I think, takes such young people without much experience and develops them into leaders of teams. So if you were to run any of our establishments, I know certainly in the restaurant sector, and I'm sure it's the same in running restaurants and hotels, you are effectively giving somebody who's probably under the age of 30, running millions of pounds of turnover a year and maybe managing a team of 30 people who are mostly on minimum wage. That sort of leadership development doesn't come easily in any other sectors. So if we can just promote a little bit more about what we do well, because we do an awful lot of things well, as an industry, I think we will attract a lot more people. But we probably are so busy, we have been so busy trying to survive. We haven't really, as a sector, looked out and said, we're actually really good at this. I mean, the government needs to recognise how good we are at this, but we will take people with very limited skill set and train and develop them. And I think that's a massive sort of management and leadership development capability as a sector we have that we don't promote. So I think there needs to be more of a concerted effort of ourselves as well as help from government.
Okay, Andrew, what's your thought?
I think the key thing from what you just mentioned there, Jane, was the skills that you're building. I think there's not enough promotion of the transferability of the skills that you're learning in this and these leadership skills, that whether the person's individual journey of a career remains in hospitality or whether it's a grounding for a transfer into another industry, I think it's promoting that longevity of the skill set that you're learning from hospitality. My biggest frustration, I think, is that we're too fragmented in terms of our approach to it. And UK hospitality have done an awful lot of good things. And I think individually, I know we do work with sort of local education establishments or in the community or into schools and things, but that's us with 50 hotels. And there's other companies that do that in their own way, but we're not joined up. And there really needs to be more of a joined up approach. And I think it needs to be driven. I know, I'm sure Sally mentioned things like the Hoteliers Charter, but she's taken that and driven it and is driving that across the industry. It needs to be something that is led and people join as a collective, because I think at the moment the approach to sort of getting that message out to education is so fragmented that the message really doesn't ram home.
So thank you. Donald, this is meat and drink to you, isn't it? You've spent your life dealing with the education of people. So where did it go wrong and what can we do to make it better? How can we get the young people of today to take, as Jane said, the same approach that they do to joining the army? And maybe we do need to do some TV advertising and stuff.
I mean, first of all, just going back on what Jane was saying, I couldn't agree with you more, Jane. And I don't think the sector always does itself a great favour in this respect. I mean, I was involved in an event recently where one of the two main national bodies representing the sector was very clearly giving the message to an audience of young people that don't worry about who you are, what your skills are. This is an industry for anyone. Now, in one respect, that's positive. But I felt that the way it was being delivered, the message, was perpetuating this notion that we are an unskilled sector, not, as Sally was saying, a sector that requires very particular human skills, attitude skills, knowledge skills in order to progress. But anyway, turning to education, obviously my involvement has always been with higher education, the university sector, and you might expect, as someone from that sector, that I would be defending its track record in relation to providing talent to the sector. But actually, I feel that in the last few years, it has gone off the rails. I think that universities are very unlikely to prioritise hospitality as a flagship area of their provision. And I've now reached the view that a more progressive model is required that possibly sits out of the established higher education system. I feel, for example, that there needs to be greater emphasis on experiential learning, the type of learning that young people engage with and react well to. There needs to be a greater proportion of fee income spent on the student experience and the development of their capabilities, rather than on esoteric research, which, quite frankly, I'm not sure benefits anyone hugely. There needs to be, as I was mentioning in relation to another answer, a more socially progressive and inclusive attitude. So really showing that as a sector, we value the diversity that characterises our sector and ensure that organisations, including educational institutes, celebrate that as one of our great advantages over other sectors. And also there needs to be the whole perpetual question about stronger relationships between education and industry, which, you know, we've been round the houses on. So frankly, I feel there is a problem in higher education. I think it's quite a fundamental problem. There are examples of institutions that are saying, no, this is going to be a flagship area. I'm working, for example, with Ulster University in Belfast at the moment, who are building an entire new hospitality campus in Belfast city centre, investing millions in new facilities and new, more progressive approaches to education. So there needs to be, with institutions like that, a great relationship and a recognition that they will be going on producing great young talent. But otherwise, I think a new model of higher education is probably required. And on that, as you know, Russell, rather than just it being rhetoric, we are going to bring forward proposals for a new institution in the nearish future.
Indeed. Watch this space. Sally, from your perspective.
I don't want to disagree, Donald, but we just run the Euros. We're headquarters of the Euros. I was running 18% occupancy for months. Yeah. And then for a period of like 10 days, I'm running 100% occupancy.
Yeah.
What do? I went to the colleges and the universities and I got 56 students that hadn't done work experience for the last 18 months. They were amazing. And these were young 18, 19-year-old kids that came. I did some living accommodation at K West because, you know, and they did every single job for me across the thing. They are fit for work, they're fit for purpose, they're enthusiastic, engaged, they just haven't got a chance because industry doesn't connect with the colleges effectively. The charter, you know, I don't keep banging on about the charter, but there's a map on the charter that puts the hotel, general manager's hotel, next to where their colleges and their universities are across the whole of the UK. And it encourages them to work within their local area to be the best in class for work experience, from secondary schools up, to connect with the colleges, to talk to the parents, to make a difference, to be there for great graduating experiences, work experience. A lot of these 53 that I had, started with 56, there were 3 that were a bit flaky. 53 came, they're on my casual list now, and there's 2 lovely girls this morning, as I walked in this morning, front desk, amazing. And we don't need to change what we've got. We need to use what we've got, and we need to communicate across the UK much, much better than we do. We have huge resource. All of us leading staff, how many of us have gone to our local college and said, what can you do? I now speak to the tutors outside of the school. My job recruitment, I send them a note, they send it straight to their kids, and then they come to me directly. It's about reaching out and using the resources we have. We don't need to reinvent it. Sorry, getting a bit passionate.
No, but I don't disagree with
Good.
anything you said in terms of the talent that's coming out of certain schools. Not at all. That's fantastic that you're connecting in the way that you are. All I'm suggesting is that the current model isn't necessarily sustainable. Applications for hospitality programs are going down nationally, which creates a problem. And I'm not sure that enough is being done to direct resources towards the development of young people. So not disagreeing about the quality of talent that's coming out, but I don't think that the current system is sustainable.
Okay, let's move to Felicity and get her to almost wrap this up. And in the meantime, I'm hoping that Sarah will reappear on my screen. Even if
I'm back, everyone. Sorry about that.
Excellent. Felicity, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, listening to Donald and Sally and everybody, you've got a lot more experience at the kind of ground floor with the colleges and recruiting people than I have. The observation I would make is twofold. It goes back to that first comment I made, Russell, about, we shouldn't be talking about low skill. And I find that really, truly depressing as somebody who was diverted from doing a BTEC in hospitality nearly over 30 years ago now. And I found my way back into the industry by chance from another route. But, I was actively discouraged from going into hospitality. But I also think, and my mother did that because she didn't think it was a great career. And I do think if we've got all of these young people coming in by whichever source and whichever way, it seems to me that what we've got to get better at along the way is actually creating a career structure for people. And going back to some of the comments to the earlier questions around work-life balance and flexibility, and showing people that this doesn't have to be a job that is incompatible with having a private life or family or being a parent and all of those things which are incredibly important to people. And that work-life balance has really come into focus during the pandemic. I mean, here am I in the middle of Spain talking to you. I'm going to be working out here for a few weeks, doing a bit of holiday. So people have reassessed their lives. And I think as an industry, we're going to have to address that. We need to organise ourselves better. I don't know how we do it, but sure as hell, I'm pretty sure the government isn't going to do it for us.
So, Sarah, bring this question up to the rear. What if the government's going to be useless, as Felicity is perhaps implying? What can the industry do? What should the industry do? It's all down to you, Sarah. All down to you.
Don't worry, we've got it covered. Apart from my internet connection, so I'm a great example there of a working parent, because I think what knocked my internet connection off was probably CBeebies downstairs. That's keeping the kids entertained. So apologies for that. I mean, in terms of the government stuff, yeah, I think as we've established, there's not a lot of support out there. I do believe that there needs to be some industry specific initiatives. So, even with things like apprenticeships and Kickstart, for us, that hasn't had a massive impact because, we're not going to be adding more jobs than we originally were going to recruit for Kickstart. And equally with things like apprenticeships, that time off the job of 20%, it just doesn't work for us. So I think if there are going to be government initiatives, there needs to be a serious amount of hospitality involvement in creating those so that they're actually valuable. In terms of what are we going to do, I think certainly within Atlas and L&R as a whole, we have built a career development programme because people need to be able to see, especially, younger people coming into the industry need to be able to see what their stepping stones are to get from maybe a team member to a team leader to a hotel manager. So we have built that. The other part that I'm continually learning about, because I'm not in the age bracket anymore, unfortunately, is just the speed at which people want to make that transition. So we've seen a lot of people come into the industry and, within 6 months, they want to be moving on to the next role. And if they can't, you're likely to lose them. So I guess there's a question there around how quickly should we engage those career development programs, because we don't want to be promoting people before they're ready. But equally, we need to acknowledge that if we don't help them move along the ranks, then they will likely move out of the industry. So we definitely need to have those internally. And actually at Atlas and L&R, we're trying to do them group wide. So we have lots of different hotels within the whole group. Maybe at Atlas, you could come in and do your first management role with a relatively simple, limited service opportunity, and then move on to a more complicated hotel within the London and Regional Group. And we're trying to kind of maximise that cross-pollination across the group itself.
Thank you. You slipped in another couple of advertisements there. So, Sarah,
yellow card. Gosh, I must be doing that without realising. I do apologise.
Yellow card to you. Listen, we've had a couple of observations from our distinguished audience. One who observes that we don't do enough to influence the millions of young people who work part-time in the industry during their further and higher education of the opportunities that exist in the sector. Yep, I'm sure that's right. But question. Is the reality that following Brexit and the resulting reduction of cheaper overseas labour supply, the UK hospitality industry is going to have to implement an across-the-board pay rise to actively compete against other industries, which, while offering potentially less interesting work, do offer more normal working hours? We don't have time to go into a lot of detail on this. A very quick answer from each of you. Andrew, what's the answer? Yes or no? We're going to have to increase pay rates, and if so, dramatically?
I think it's inevitable, but I think it needs to be balanced against what you're offering that person as both development and the culture. I don't think we can get into a sort of wage war across the industry, but we need to be making sure that people see value in not just the pay, but also the other elements of the job that you bring to them as an employer.
Okay, quick answer from you, Donald.
Yes, I agree with Andrew that it's probably inevitable. Whilst I'm no fan of Brexit, the one of the probable fallouts is that there will be an upturn in wages within hospitality, but that has to be balanced with aspects of cultural change that we've been through in detail. So the answer is yes, I would say.
Sally, is everybody in violent agreement here? Sally, are you finding the same?
I think it's supply and demand. It's an employee's market at the moment. So you can not necessarily choose your package, but you can certainly choose your benefits and your culture, as Andrew and Donald were saying. But I think employers need to be creative. It's not just money, it's the whole package. But I think there will be an increase in the base salary, moving closer to London living wage for a lot of our teams, as opposed to national minimum wage. I think a lot of us sit in the middle of that. And I think there's going to be, salary inflation. But if it's just money, I don't think the team members will be engaged to stay. So it's retention. So it has to be the whole holistic culture and benefits.
Okay. I'm just looking at Jane, Sarah and Felicity. If you've got anything to add to what's been said, please raise a hand. Otherwise, I've got one very quick question, followed by my last question, because unfortunately time is not on our side. So a very quick topical question relating to tips and trunks. Quick question. Should employers distribute 100% of what patrons pay, or is there a justification for some being retained by the organisation? Donald?
No justification whatsoever. I think we were talking earlier about the image of hospitality, the image of hospitality employment. One very negative message that we send out can be off the back of employers retaining tips. So no, I would say there's no justification. Very clearly, that has to be distributed in some fair way amongst staff.
Okay, so one says no. Does anybody feel there is justification? Anybody want to raise their hand? Yes, Felicity.
No, I'm agreeing with Donald. Okay. I personally agree with him.
Okay. Anybody want to jump in with a different answer?
No.
Now was your time. Okay. Listen, I've loved doing this session. It's been great working with you. I've got one very final question for you. What single activity or action? So one thing, again, and only one each, and don't choose the one that your predecessors have chosen. So what one single activity or action do you recommend hotels implement now to enable businesses to return to profitability? So one and one only, Sally.
Oh, thanks. To enable businesses to return to profitability.
Yep.
I mean, we need to get the local community to travel and spend money in our hotels.
Okay, that'll do. Felicity.
Yeah, I was going to be with that one. You know, if we're going to get to profitability, we need certainty. We need people to start moving again. And right now, COVID is not giving us that.
Sarah?
I'd say review everything that you put in place during the pandemic and which bits you're going to keep and which bits you're going to lose. You know, some bits have been great that we've done and we'll keep them. There's been some new technology that we've implemented in our hotels. There's been more communication, but some bits absolutely dump them. But I do think that there is an opportunity just to step back and take that review when we're in this position of hopefully returning to profitability to maximise our opportunities in the next few months.
Thank you. Jane?
I would get out your CRM database and remind your customers why they love you so much. You know,
Nice answer.
Wonderful.
So why don't we go there and say we are just the wonderful, decadent, enjoying experience that you thought it was before. Be good to yourself. We will be good to you. We're very safe environments and we really are here for you. And I would just get out there and communicate how safe and how wonderful we are.
Wonderful. Andrew?
My biggest tip would be don't go back to what you did before. We've made a lot of changes. We've taken costs out of the business. We've looked at different ways of doing things. It's very easy to slip back to what you were doing before, but don't. Okay.
Donald?
I would say probably focus on quality of product, quality of service. You know, you're going to be fighting to get customers back. Stand out from the crowd by producing an outstanding product.
And because I went to you when you weren't expecting me to, Sally, you've got a final word that you want to add to what you said before?
I think make sure that your revenue streams are solid. I mean, we've had to sort of diversify. If you've got something that's losing, don't open it. Keep moving forward, be creative, be resilient. And in that you will find your profit levels and you will find your revenue streams, but authentic, good quality service will get there in the end.
Wonderful. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Sally Beck, Felicity Black-Roberts, Sarah Brocklebank, Jane O'Riordan, Andrew Robb, and Donald Sloan. And with that, I hand you back to Chris Shepherdson to wrap up the session and bring everything to a close. But thank you, guys. Lovely to work with you.
Thanks, Russell.
Thanks, Russell. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Well done, Russell. That was superb. And thank you to all the panelists. That was a really interesting discussion. And I think it probably explains just why this landscape and this topic is such a complex one. I hope you've really enjoyed the last hour and a half. We started with Stephanie, and I have to say all credit to Stephanie for a fascinating presentation that really outlined just how problematic some of these legal issues that are going to be faced. She talked about the shortages which are going to be here to stay. It isn't going to be an easy answer. Visas aren't going to be suddenly provided, so we've got to find the new answers, and that's going to make everyone have to think differently and learn to live with these shortages and see how we can actually adapt that. So one of the great debates in the model is how models are going to change and how they're going to be adapted, and I suspect there's going to be far more than people realise. Stephanie talked about the need to protect yourselves against claims, naturally enough, how to manage against absences, but that's going to be incredibly problematic with all the pinging that goes on, and hotels are going to be very vulnerable to pinging. So how's that going to play out, which is going to be? She talked about the tensions that are naturally going to happen, particularly for those who are coming back from furlough. How do they feel about those who haven't been on furlough? How do workers who don't want to be vaccinated feel about coming back to work, and how employers are going to feel about those who don't want to be vaccinated, and the same about those who don't want to be tested. So there's all kinds of areas which actually could rise to all kinds of conflict right across the businesses. And then there's a need to manage, probably better than we've ever done before, employee data. And actually that's going to have to be done with real, genuine care. So great presentation by Stephanie that really outlined a whole range of issues that we're going to have to think through very carefully as we go. The panel, all kinds of issues came from the panel. That was really interesting. Felicity obviously talking about, which I thought very valid, about the need to really recognise not just how important people are, but can we maybe stop talking about low-skilled staff, because actually those people on the front line are probably the ones that probably make the most difference. And actually they're not low-skilled. They have obviously really important skills. So maybe we need to think about sometimes our narrative and our dialogue and actually how we talk about things. Sarah talked about the amazing resilience, and so did Sally, about the amazing resilience that staff have shown during this period, employees have shown during this period of time, how they've really helped each other and how supported each other. Andrew talked about the importance of honest communication. I think that this period of time has probably recognised that honest communication is probably more important and really more respected than actually sometimes the effort that's been put on it pre-pandemic. And that's created a change, which I think is a good change that's happened as well as we come out of it. Sally noted about the flexibility that staff are doing and that teams are going to be doing. How does one support each other across divisions? It's no longer can people work just as a silo. We need to be far more flexible in how we think about the business and how we support one another. Sarah brought up the importance of lifestyle, work-life balance, which she's very passionate about, and that's a very fair one because that's going to become a bigger issue as well. Now, how do we find that right balance? How can companies make it that little bit easier as we go? We know restaurants who are looking at changing some of their work patterns, some of their opening hours to give better work-life balance, and also to make sure they can look after their own talent. How's that going to also change models as we go forward? And how's it going to be impacting? And particularly as we go into pinging as well, because actually how will pinging, again, impact on that whole piece of planning? Kind of getting the pinging piece and the planning right is going to be a real skill in itself as we go. Donald talked a lot about the need for change in education. Is that present model sustainable, and do we need to think about how it can be changed and how it can be developed? But also, and quite rightly, that we need to develop progressive social thinking, that we need to be far more progressive in how we think about teams and that in terms of diversity and inclusion, quite rightly, and how we need to celebrate that and how we need to just maybe change some of the old-fashioned thinking that has existed in pre-pandemic, quite rightly too. So all kinds of issues coming up. It's not going to be a clear cut. There's going to be all kinds of tensions we're going to face. And it's going to be a challenging time. I still think that although the next 5-6 months is going to be incredibly challenging, I think as we go into next year, the industry will adapt and reinvent itself in a lot of different areas. And actually, there's a very positive future still to come. So thanks to everybody, some fantastic speakers and some great panelists, and my thanks. And my thank you for you for joining us today. And I look forward to seeing you again in the near future. Thank you again. Take care.